Welcome, everyone. I'm Marla Miller from marlamiller.com, presenting another episode of Lit Salon Prose Talk Prose. For those of you who are just tuning into this show, and I hope that's a lot of you, I just want to give you a little bit of background on myself. I'm a writer who came to the writing life when my kids were little, an author, and I eventually became a writing workshop leader at writing conferences, mostly on the West Coast. And in fact, it was at a West Coast Writers Conference that I met Tom Huth, who is here today to discuss his upcoming memoir that's going to be released on 4/20/2016. Tom walked into my workshop, I think it was in 2013, and read a piece of a book that eventually became 40 Years Stoned, a journalist romance. Tom, welcome to Lit Salon Prose Talk Prose.
Thanks, Marla.
I'm delighted to have you here. So we go back a long way, and in the name of transparency, I should tell people that this is a book that I not only like, but I love. And loved it from the first story that you presented in my workshop. You read what turned out to be the opening chapter in 40 Years Stoned, a journalist romance. And you had written that like when, Tom? Can you give us just a little background? And I should tell people that we're having some connectivity problems. Are you with me now? I don't think he is. So I think we've been having these connectivity problems. This is like the third time that we've tried to do this show. And Tom, you're not hearing me? No?
I am now.
Oh, okay. All right. So now I just kind of filled in. I asked about the story that opens up 40 Years Stoned. Could you talk just a little bit about that particular story that you read in my workshop at the Santa Barbara Writers Conference several years ago?
Yes. That story was originally the opening to a memoir about my experience caregiving my wife with Parkinson's for 20 years. And when that didn't sell, I realized that I would like to write another memoir that incorporated that and other stories, which was a general memoir that focused on the marijuana experience and how that contributed to each of these life's major experiences, including the caregiving. And so I just transferred that, and it had been the opening to a different book, but I felt it was a good piece of writing. It would hook people in. Once I got them hooked in, I took them a little direct, but did a different direction.
Indeed, you did. I should tell people a little bit about your history, but right now I'm concerned about our connectivity. Are you hearing me okay?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Good. Okay. So when Tom came into my workshop and he read a piece that was probably, if it was 1,000 words, that was a long piece. Tom didn't know that I'm a medical marijuana activist when he read that piece. He had no idea. I had no idea that he had a very long experience with cannabis. I just knew good writing when I heard it. I knew a good story, and that one absolutely excited me. So we should talk a little bit about 40 Years Stoned. Yes, in fact, it is a book about the main arc of this story is about your caregiving, your beloved wife, Holly, who was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease about 20 years ago. That said, tell us how it went from that narrative through line to embracing all of your other 40 years worth of experience with marijuana. Do you remember when you went, aha?
Well, any memoir, any story about my life would necessarily have to be quite a bit about marijuana, because it has been a linchpin or a guiding force in my life for 40-some years. In fact, whenever I have sat down, writers are always told, write what you know. And so when I have thought about what do I know, and I sat down to write about it and make a list, every time I write, and I make the list stoned, I admit, but when I sit and make the list down, number 2 or number 3 has to be the effects of marijuana. I really know that. And I'm not a world expert in anything else, I don't think. That's something I really know. So I just thought, well, I should write about this. So I just swept in other parts of my life, and a lot of humor, a lot of funny chapters. The longest chapter is about my brother's kidnap to murder on the highways of Central California, and by a serial killer, and my befriending the guy on death row to find out how Jerry spent his final night on Earth. But anyway, that marijuana ties in with that too.
It ties into all of this.
That search, yes.
Let's talk a little bit about your background, Tom, because a lot of people come to the writing life after they've done other professions, and that's cool. However, you've been a writer since you were a kid. I should tell our listeners that you started out at a Detroit press. You're from the great city of Detroit. You then must have written pretty dang well, because you were hired by the Washington Post in the 70s. You've been a Condé Nast writer for a long time. In fact, let's pull up the book cover of 40 Years Stoned, because there's a story there as well. Let's see if I can do it. No, this is your website. Okay, but 40 Years Stoned is there a little bit. Talk a little bit about your experience as a writer, and how marijuana factored in back in the day.
How it factors into my writing?
How it did back in the day, Tom, when it was extremely, you started smoking marijuana back in the 70s when it was really, well, not quite in the 70s, but it was almost legal in the 70s, because you worked for Normal for a while. Is that correct?
Right. Well, I first started smoking marijuana regularly in 1972, and that's when I also started using it in my writing, when I was writing feature stories for the Washington Post. And I just realized that if I, on the way back from an assignment to the office, if I smoked a joint in the company car on the way back, and I got to the office, it just gave that story a poetic lift-off that could easily lift it up to page 1. And so I just thought, this is a key that I don't know how else to activate my imagination as much as marijuana does. So I thought, why should I not write everything stoned? And I have ever since.
And so let's fast forward a little bit, because Lit Salon is for writers who are on the road to their own publication, who are looking for tips, looking for advice, guidance from people who are maybe a bit further along the road, and you certainly are, because you've been a lifetime writer. When you decided to make this into a book, was there any trepidation on your part? And I know the answers to this because you and I have been working together, but our listeners don't. Any trepidation about exposing yourself in this way to a large community of writers and the American public that, ostensibly could get you in trouble? Was there any concern about that, Tom?
For years and years, I was a successful travel writer for the major travel magazines for 25 years. And although I often took marijuana along on those trips, I never revealed to my editors that I was a smoker. That travel writing gig ended a few years ago when the magazine stopped running long-form features. But I have nothing left professionally to protect. I might not like all of my relatives and stepchildren, and certainly my grandchildren, to know that Grandpa is an old stoner. But hopefully my grandchildren won't read this.
Well, but what if they do, Tom? Because you know that you have, and this is through no design of your own, you just had a story that you wanted to tell. But this book, this memoir, is going to be published on April 20th, 2016 by Heliotrope Books in New York City. And you really didn't have a full appreciation of how fast this legalization movement has come upon us when you decided to write this. You just were writing from your heart, yes?
Right.
And so the reality is that this book may be perceived in a very, very different way than it would have been perceived 5 years ago.
Well, then, whatever comes, what may, I'm ready for it. I can't turn back now.
Well, the reason why I bring this up, Tom, is because often in my workshops, and of course I've heard it for many years, is that a writer should never, ever, ever write to a trend. And I believe that. I don't think a writer should ever write to a trend. But when I heard your work, and because I was an activist, I knew the trend was building. And and just because I knew it, just because of my own personal work. And lo and behold, I couldn't have even imagined that in the last 2.5 to 3 years that it would have moved as fast as it's moved. I mean, you could actually be greeted by a huge audience. And I've said this to you before, and of course we're keeping fingers crossed that you will. But if you are, there will be 2 reasons for it. One, you hit the sweet spot of a growing movement. And 2, you're just a damn fine storyteller. You know?
Well, it'd be nice to have both of those, right?
Wouldn't that be lovely? And so let's talk a little bit, because you're not a young person. I am not a young person. This 21st century publishing that we are in the midst of certainly came before we were. Let's see if we can get back to. You know what? I'm just going to keep your. I'm going to keep your website up because we can see you in the corner, and that's cool.
Okay.
But we're not youngins, is what I'm saying. And so adapting to 21st century publishing realities is tougher for some than others. It hasn't been that tough for me because I've absolutely found a home in social media. But you were not one of those people who instantly took to it. And I remember back in the early days you saying, oh, I don't know if I can do that. But you did like Facebook. So talk a little bit about how you have jumped into the marketing of your own memoir.
Well, part of the reason it's been easier than I thought it would be was that most of it breaks down to just a different kind of writing, short pitches, but it's all writing. If you're a writer like me, you love to write like I do, I can write a book, or I can write a short little pitch and spend a day trying to make it the best damn one page that ever got written. And so it all turns out to be another one kind of writing or another, even if it's just a Facebook comment. It can be a clever or endearing piece of writing, if it all matters, if it's a tweet, if it's whatever. So I didn't, I thought I would be out there on the street corners trying to sell my book. Not exactly, but I realized it's just more writing, and I love to do that. So I'm pretty much through this process, or certainly partway through this process of selling the book, and I'm enjoying it.
Okay, good. And one of the reasons why I want to bring this up to our listeners is, as I said earlier in this interview, a lot of us bring many, many skill sets to our writing life. But for those of us who haven't been writing since we were youngsters, every bit of writing that we do is more of a challenge. And because I knew that your experience was so deep, I knew that you had all of those skill sets in your toolbox. And it was just a matter of you appreciating that, which you began to do as we talked about contacts, tapping into your contacts. So now I want to talk about how Tom tapped into his contacts, and maybe we could start with the cover of 40 Years Stone, A Journalist's Romance. Why don't you tell us that tale?
How that came about?
Yeah, because that's a sweet tale, Tom.
Well, that photograph is taken, of course, by the famous Annie Leibovitz.
Yep.
And it was taken in 1994 when I was a travel writer and went down to Costa Rica with my wife, Holly, who's on the cover there. And we decided to build a beach shack in Costa Rica. And I knew it would be that travel magazines would love this idea. And it ended up to be a 3-part series. And they sent Annie Leibovitz down to shoot us, and she dressed us up in these palm fronds. We had nothing on underneath there. And it was a thrill, of course, to work with her. And she was the biggest thing that ever happened to this little expatriate gringo community. And but anyway, and then I said I forgot about it. The magazine published the articles, and that was 20 years ago. And when it came time to to do this book, the idea came up. It was another marijuana writer named Catherine Hiller who suggested, why don't you make that the cover? And my publisher, Naomi Rosenblatt, jumped on board. And of course, Marla, who was a dream to work with, she jumped on board. And it was fortunate. I went to an archive agency to ask what it would cost to use that photo of me, and it would be $5,000. And so we worked directly with Annie Leibovitz's office, and she did it for us for free. So thank you, Annie. I think it makes a beautiful cover.
It makes a fabulous cover. And again, writers, your prior experiences, you never know. When you're going to be able to utilize them. And the fact that you approached getting that photo the way you would approach any kind of story or any kind of pitch certainly made, I think, that process of getting her to say yes easier, because I read your pitches to her and they were terrific. Again, this is where experience comes in, writers, and if you don't have it, don't be in a real big hurry to publish your book. Collect your experience. So now let's talk, Tom, about Melissa Etheridge and the beautiful blurb. We don't see it on 40 Years Stoned yet, but on the later galley, her blurb flows across the top of 40 Years Stoned. Talk a little bit about Melissa and how you got her.
Well, Marla, I think it was you who suggested she might be a good get, because she was really trying to get out there into the world with her message. Mm-hmm. She has used it medically, and she uses it on stage, and she's written about it and talked about it. And so, what you do is you find out who the person's publicist is, and then you pitch them and tell them that if Melissa would give us a blurb, we'd put it on page 1, and on the cover. Mm-hmm. And finally, she did give us a blurb, and it was too long, and so I had to edit it down very severely. The one tribute we couldn't leave out was the words, "You will be changed by this book." Mm-hmm. So that's basically what we boiled it down to. And then I just hoped her publicist wouldn't complain, "Hey, you knocked out most of it." But how could they complain? We got
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so. And like Melissa, you then went to other leaders in the field and asked them. A couple said no just because they were too busy. But again, Steve DeAngelo and Valerie Carell, both iconic leaders in the movement. You pitched to them, yes? Yes, and that worked out. And then I happened to run into Billy Hayes, the author of Midnight Express in the 70s. And he happily signed on and wrote a wonderful blurb. And then have befriended Catherine Hiller, who wrote Just Say Yes, a marijuana memoir from the same publisher as mine, Heliotrope Books. And she was happy to write a blurb. So that's kind of fun, assembling a bunch of blurbs like that. And they all turned out just great. I'm so gratified. Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about you're in still pre-publication. You've got a couple of things lined up. I know we've got some reviews coming in. You're working hard on those. Your team is working hard on those. You've already got your time set for publication date. You're going to be in your other home. You live in, I should tell listeners, that Tom lives in California, but he also resides in Colorado and has for many years with Holly. And so you're going to be in Colorado on 420, yes?
Yes, at the Boulder Bookstore in downtown Boulder. And I hope all of my homies from the little town of Gold Hill will come down, at least 50 of them, and carouse and make noise and then shut up when I try to read. Yes, that's the best place. So, and then I think I'm going to have a couple readings in New York City in early May. And we'll see about the Santa Barbara area.
We're hoping Santa Barbara. The Santa Barbara Writers Conference is the first week in June, and Tom certainly will be there in one of my workshops as a guest. But I'm, hoping that he'll have even more visibility there, because we are claiming you. The Santa Barbara Writers Conference is definitely claiming Tom Huth.
Well, one of our own. I had never been to a writers' conference until I went to to the Santa Barbara conference 2 years ago and read that piece and befriended you. And now I wouldn't miss it. It's a wonderful experience, and I love going back. And I'll have a little more to say this year because something's actually happening in my book career.
Indeed, it is. And so, anything else, Tom, that you'd want to? Because I don't want this interview to get too long. I know that this is going to be the first of many. Are you delighted so far? Are you exhausted yet? Do you have a million ideas? Oh, I do know one more thing. So again, for my listeners, I really need to put this in our interview. Tom has been pitching to online magazines and print magazines. And as you all know, platform building is critical to selling books and hopefully selling a lot of books. Tom, talk to us about your connection and your series at MaryJane.com, which is Snoop Dogg's newest lifestyle magazine that's just making a killing out here. Give us a little bit. Yeah.
There's several marijuana websites, and I've had some success. The most success at Mary Jane. I had 3 pieces published, 2 of them adaptations from the book and one standalone. And then the Senior Stoner is another good source, and they have bought one of mine, have another one. Stoner's Cookbook is another one. So it's kind of fun. They don't for writers, they don't pay much. But the idea for me is to get my name out there in these magazines and on these online forums, to mention my book and hook into my book and sell my book. And for our listeners, Tom, I just want people to really appreciate that what Tom has done is he has found his tribe. He has found a network of people who are likely to help him. And in fact, almost to the one, everyone has been saying yes to him. You mentioned Senior Stoner, and that's Sherry Seacart's newest online magazine that's really getting attention. She's so excited about your book. Women Grow is an organization that we are definitely hoping, they're out of Colorado, and we're definitely hoping to get their attention. But I just need to really underscore this, writers, that you will do the heaviest lifting to promote your book. I also think it's critical to get a team around you who can help you do that so that you can focus on what you do best. And for Tom, what he does brilliantly is he writes. And he also, because of his long history, has a terrific network in which to pull from. And so Tom's doing his writing, and his publisher is doing her thing, and I'm doing my thing, and it does take a village. Wouldn't you say, Tom? Yes, and a team is exactly. It would be pretty lonely to feel I was doing this all alone.
I agree.
Lou Marla and Lisa Angle, who's helped me with my website.
Absolutely.
And Naomi, and it just feels like a team. And Naomi, the publisher, is a designer and designed the cover, and we've worked very closely. And it's just a delight to do this as a team. It doesn't even feel like my book. It feels like our book. Which
is really lovely, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it is a team effort. But Tom, it's your book because you're one hell of a storyteller. You truly are.
Thanks, Marla.
With that, I'm going to close Lit Salon Prose, Talk Prose, because we have just listened for almost a half hour to a longtime pro talk about his new memoir coming out on April 20th, 2016, 40 Years Stoned, a journalist's romance. And indeed, it is a romantic tale about Tom Huth's 40 years in the writing life, where marijuana definitely has been of influence. Tom, thanks so much for coming on.
Sure, and I just want to say one thing. It's actually been 44 years, but I forget it.
You're allowed. How's that?
Okay.
You're allowed. Thanks again for coming on. And until the next time, listeners, be well, keep writing. And if there's any authors out there who are looking for some promotion, send me an email, marketingthemusic@gmail.com. I'm looking for authors, folks. Until the next time, be well, and again, keep writing.